Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Hite Namani.
This was my senior year at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I had gotten married that year, the same woman I'm married to now, Sadamini, but we weren't devotees then. And that was such a quaint, old-fashioned thing to do that the Dean of Women actually invited us over for dinner, you know. So I was up in the Van Pelt Library at Penn, looking from the top. You can see down across the campus in the little paths and walkways. And I see what looks to me like an Indian monk walking down this pathway. And I couldn't take my eyes off of him. You know, I was a little far away to see very distinctly, but I couldn't take my eyes off of him. And I came home, I was all excited, and I said to my wife, I saw this Indian monk. I could tell he was Indian because of the complexion of his face. And he was also wearing, you know, some kind of robe. I saw this Indian monk. I couldn't take my eyes off of him. I want to be just like him. And so then years later, actually, I found out when Buri Jan's daughter, Lalita, had made a timeline of where Prabhupada was when he came to America for this Prabhupada conference we were having in Detroit. And she had built this whole timeline up. And there it said that Prabhupada had come to the University of Pennsylvania just at that time, at the beginning of the semester. And I realized that had to be Srila Prabhupada. There weren't any Indian monks in those days. You didn't see Indians at all yet. The immigration laws hadn't quite taken effect yet, where a lot of Indians started to come. And so I showed it to my wife. I said, look at that, you know, that Indian monk, that was Srila Prabhupada. We were both amazed. Because after that, there was a famous Indologist at Penn. He gave his class, and from there he went to Butler in Pennsylvania. So he hadn't even gone to New York yet.
Early days.
Yeah, very early. He had just stopped off on his way to Butler because he made some contacts with the Indologists, and so he was there. So that was dawned on me later who that was. You know, that was Srila Prabhupada.
Well, previously to meeting Srila Prabhupada in India, actually in Mumbai, at a Cross Maidan, he was doing the Cross Maidan festival. I've been sent over from France, and I came to Delhi, and when I got to Delhi, we missed our connecting flight, and there were no more connecting flights, basically. The planes were on strike, but some emergency flights were being run once a day by the government, and there was a long waiting list to get on any flight. So we believe I spoke to Guru Das, and he told me to get to the railway station and buy a ticket to go to Bombay. So and I had to get there and arrange it by 2 o'clock. So when I got to the railway station, I was literally pushing people out of the way to get to the front by 2 o'clock. And then I got a ticket. We traveled to Mumbai, of course Bombay in those times. And I went to where Srila Prabhupada was staying on Warden Road. It was called Warden Road, Akash Ganga building. It was Breach Candy or something like that. Anyway, I got to that building. He was on the 8th floor of the Akash Ganga building, I believe. And I went up there, and we had just gotten off the train. Those days, the trains were all burning coal. And we were all just covered with coal soot from head to foot, literally. And Prabhupada embraced us. It was quite, I was wondering about embracing Prabhupada because it was quite dirty. But Prabhupada embraced us. And at the time, I remember Malati was in the room with Prabhupada, and she was telling him that Saraswati was ill and like this. So but she was not hysterical, but she was very distraught. And she asked Prabhupada what she should do, and Prabhupada just told her, chant Hare Krishna, like that. He didn't, and my first reaction was like total amazement, like Srila Prabhupada. I'd read his books, I'd heard about him, but when I was listening to him and seeing him, he was literally, for me, larger than life. I never could actually tell you how tall Prabhupada was. It was not within my estimation to be able to measure his height. All I knew is that he was always, divine and larger than life. And I always felt that way. And from the moment I met him, I was amazed that here's a distraught mother. She's very afflicted, and he's telling her, chant Hare Krishna, and in a calming way. Like, don't worry about it. You just chant Hare Krishna and everything will work out. And of course it did. So that was my first impression of Srila Prabhupada.
And then devotees were part of the counterculture. And so one of my friends from Penn had started to go to the temple. And he said, hey, you got to come this far out, this love feast, you got to come, it's really far out. Everything was far out in those days, far out. So I went to the temple. And so by then, Sodamani and I had a child. We had one child, and it was a little weird, the temple in those days. I mean, they wouldn't get away from the altar because they didn't want the devotees the deities. They just had a Panchatattva painting on the altar, but they didn't want the Lord to look at meat eaters. And they would crowd out in front of it and everything like that. But I chanted with the devotees, and somebody gave me some beads, and I started, chanting a round or two, a little bit in the beads. And our daughter, who was just a little toddler, she loved prasadam. Couldn't get enough of it, so that more than anything else had us coming back for the prasadam. And they moved a few times, so that was how I just became just got to know Krishna consciousness by the devotees. Although devotees were a little off-putting. You'd go in and you'd blow out a candle. Don't blow out that candle. You realize the mouth is the dirtiest part of your body. What you shouldn't, don't blow out that candle, They had all kinds of little weird, they were in a mood of chastisement, But somehow or other, I kept coming back. And I had read several different versions of the Bhagavad Gita translations. They all influenced by the Ramakrishna Mission version of Hinduism, like Swami Nikhilananda was teaching, and but there was something about Prabhupada, and I think the first book I got was the Isha Upanishad, which I knew already. I'd studied it already several times, you know. Om Purnamada Purnamidam. You know, so it was, that was, so that way slowly I became, you know, involved in Krishna consciousness. Though it wasn't until much later that I found out that that person that I had seen before, everything had been Prabhupada.
At that time I just got to India. I'd been with the devotees in Europe for some time, but I wasn't initiated. So then it was scheduled that I would be initiated during the Cross Maidan program. And there was I would say there's about 70,000 people coming nightly to that Pando program in Bombay. There had been signs around, billboards all over Mumbai about the Hare Krishna people and everything like this. And Prabhupada had indicated his criteria. He said, if you're going to rob Fort Knox, that's where all the gold is kept. And if you're going to hunt for the rhinoceros. And he said, the reason is, if you're successful, everyone will talk about that. And if you're not successful, people will just say it couldn't be done. So it reminds me of a verse of Srila Rupa Goswami. He says, what is the good of a poet's poetry or a hunter's arrows if they just merely pierce the heart but do not cause the head to spin? So Prabhupada was interested in having a program which would cause people's head to spin. He wanted that. And he accomplished that. The Cross Maidan program was amazing, 70,000 people. And actually on the platform at night, that's when I was initiated. And people were initiated. There was a wedding done right during the Pando program in front of thousands of people. I think it was Vagavan from Sweden, I believe, and his wife, I don't remember her name, but she was from Australia. They were married. And I was initiated, so Prabhupada chose names, or who chose the names for Prabhupada. They went pretty much, the Krishna book had just come out, so there was the list of Krishna's principal queens and then their sons. Each queen had 10 sons. So almost everybody was given a name of one of the sons of Krishna. So I received the name of I believe Jambavati, that queen, and her famous son was, I think, Shamba, but I was given the name Dravida. So I was initiated at that beginning of February of, I believe it was 1971, at that program. Pancha Dravida was my Sannyas name. I was initiated in early 71. I received Gayatri initiation in maybe October of 71. And then after that, I asked Prabhupada to take sannyas. And Prabhupada said, wait a little while. But I also felt like he wanted me to do something. So then I arranged to start prasad distribution that was in 1972 in Juhu Beach. And we started, and I had Lokanath Swami. He wasn't initiated at the time. And he would, I would go out into the warehouse district, and I would collect all the grains and, well, everything except rice. Rice was being rationed by the government. So I would collect the wheat flour, would collect sugar, I would collect dal, and everything needed to distribute prasadam except rice. And then we would go into the neighborhood in Juhu Beach and knock on apartments and collect rice. And Lokanath Swami was with me. He was the principal rice collector because he was more humble than me. So and we'd go and bring the rice back. And then we started distributing prasadam. And Prabhupada liked that program. So then I wrote to Prabhupada, and he said, he was outside the country at that time. He would spend about 4 or 5 months outside of India because he was trying to emphasize India. He was just developing his projects there. So when I wrote him, he wrote me back, and he said, when I come back to India, I'll give you sannyas then. He came to Vrindavan. He was staying at the Radha Damodar temple, and we were staying nearby at Keshi Ghat, and we would come see Prabhupada. So at that time, when Prabhupada came there, I started to speak, and I started to say, you know, Srila Prabhupada that I wrote, and before I could even finish the sentence, he said, now you are ready, now I will give you sannyas. Because it was relatively new, people were shocked. So then people in the room, they asked Srila Prabhupada, well, can I take sannyas? I think Guru Kripa, Paribrajacharya Maharaj, who became that, Paramahamsa Maharaj, they were all sannyas. They were there, and they asked Prabhupada for sannyas, and he said, no, wait. So so I had been doing this prasad distribution in Mumbai. So Prabhupada said he would give me sannyas on the day of the Ras Leela. I forget, the Shravan Ras Leela. And I told him, well, one thing, Srila Prabhupada, I was thinking of distributing prasadam here in Vrindavan, and I need to go to Agra to collect for distributing prasadam. So it's kind of sudden to take the sannyas. So more or less I was saying, could it just wait till I get back? And Srila Prabhupada said, yes, these ceremonies are not important. So then I went with Lokanath Maharaj. He was uninitiated, and we went to Agra, and we collected one of those vehicles full of grains and oil and all these things for the distribution, and we brought them back, and we were gone about 8 or 9 days. And when I got back, Paramahamsa, Guru Kripa, and Paribrajak, they were all now initiated, initiated sannyasis. So then I asked Srila Prabhupada said, well, then you'll be initiated on the day of Govardhan Puja, because we were distributing prasadam. But I was a little fearful because I knew that any day Tamal Krishna Maharaj would get there, and I knew Tamal very well. We worked together, and I thought he would put a stop to this because he is very, very convincing. So I said, well, Srila Prabhupada, I have to get back to my service, which wasn't exactly true. But so then Srila Prabhupada called Pradyumna, he said, who he called Panditji. He said, Panditji, when's the next auspicious day? And Pradyumna said, Bahulashtami. That's Bahulashtami is a day of the Radha Kund was revealed or something. It's a nice day. So anyway, Srila Prabhupada said, okay, you'll take sannyas on that day. So meantime, Srila Prabhupada was giving lectures each night on the nectar of devotion. He had already written and published Nectar of Devotion, and he was giving lectures based on the introduction of the Nectar of Devotion. And then Tamal Krishna showed up the morning that I was taking sannyas, but by that time my cloth was dyed and my danda was wrapped and everything. And he said, later he told me, he said, you know, I was really surprised that you were taking sannyas. And I thought to myself, yes, that's the way it was supposed to be. But, I mean, I'm close friends with I was close friends with Tamal Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada, when he gave me the, first, before I was Dravida Das, and Dravida Das, I was thinking, what is, I was thinking, I had a little reluctance to maybe Dravida Das, and then I couldn't even pronounce it so well, but, and then, so I was thinking, and then Srila Prabhupada, I was thinking maybe Prabhupada will change my name when he gives me sannyas. So then he said, there are 5 acharyas from South India, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Vishnu Swami, Nimbarkacharya, and Shankaracharya. They're all from South India. And he told me, and you are the essence of all of them. That's what he told me, Panchadravida. And it is mentioned in his books, Pancha Gora and Panchadravida. And so a little bit I was thinking, oh, before I was 1 Dravida, now I'm 5 of them. But it was, and so then I became Panchadravida. And that was more or less what I gathered from the name.
So after having been in the temple, finally we heard that Prabhupada was coming back and he was going to go to the New York temple. And by then, my wife and I were okay for initiation. So we went up to New York City. It's not so far from Philadelphia. It's a short ride. And there was a lot of devotees, because Prabhupada had been away for so long. They would bring a whole bunch in. They were doing every day different group of people getting initiated. You know, bring a whole group in, they get initiated, and then try to get them to leave. So the next, because the temple was, people were sleeping on the fire escapes, people were sleeping on the roof, it was packed, you know. And so I didn't get much any time to talk personally to Prabhupada, you know. And so at the initiation, I came up and offered to pay obeisances to Srila Prabhupada. And he would hand you the beads. He'd say, your name is, and what I heard was, your name is Unju. And I went and sat back down. I said to the guy next to me, what did you say my name was? He said, Govinda Svarupa. And that didn't sound right. So then after it was all over with, and then, and Prabhupada said, he said, Ravindra Svarupa, and he said, like sunshine. That was his translation name, just like sunshine. So then when my wife came up and he gave her the name Sodamini, and he said, brilliant night, because it means lightning that flashes at night, brilliant night. And I thought, wow, that's very poetic, you know, daylight and nightlight, you know, together. So I was impressed by that. And then all people would ask me that, well, while I was there, what is your name? First somebody told me, yeah, it's not Govinda Svarupa, it's Ravindra Svarupa. Oh, okay. And then they said, somebody else had that name before. Yeah, I went up to the guy with a list of names. What did I say my name? Ravindra Svarupa. I said, not Govinda Svarupa? He says, no, Ravindra Svarupa. And then somebody else said, yes, someone else already had that name. I said, oh, who is that? And they said, it's a crazy hippie. That's what they heard that all day long. Just a crazy hippie. So that was the initiation, and I went back to Philadelphia, and very soon I became the temple president, you know, because I was the oldest guy there. I'm the only one who'd held down a job and things like that, you know.
Srila Prabhupada was coming to coming to Kolkata, he came with Rupanuga Maharaj. Rupanuga was his secretary. And at the time, they announced that Srila Prabhupada would no longer be answering his personal correspondence, that he had too much personal correspondence. And I was very disturbed by that, because I've been corresponding with Srila Prabhupada, and I always wait, and I'd get these aerograms. He would send us aerograms. And I loved getting those things. I was very attached to corresponding with Srila Prabhupada. And now Rupanuga was saying that that GBC would be answering all the letters of Srila Prabhupada because he had too much correspondence. So I was thinking some reason why I could say to Rupanuga why I should be able to continue corresponding with Srila Prabhupada. So I told Rupanuga, I said, well, what happens if we have a complaint about the GBC itself? Then they'll be answering, how will that get to, it's not a very diplomatic way of putting things, but how will we be able to get this information to Srila Prabhupada if it's all being answered by the GBC? And then Rupanuga said, well, we're trying to relieve Srila Prabhupada of so much extra burden with this mail. So anyway, my question to him wasn't well received. And then Srila Prabhupada came to me and he said something to the effect, well, Rupanuga tells me that you're complaining. Oh, he told me you're complaining and that you're not doing service or something like that. And I was like amazed, because all the other sannyasis had already gone to Mayapur, and Tamal Krishna, he told me, you stay here, because he knew I was collecting grains and everything. He said, you stay here and collect for the Mayapur festival. And your success will be judged by how high the bags of big quintals, which is like about 50 to 50 pounds of grains, how high those sacks are stacked. So I was thinking, great, I'm here, and all the other sannyasis have gone to Mayapur. At that time I was a sannyasi. So then Prabhupada comes to me and tells me, Rupanuga tells me you're not engaged and that you're quarrelsome or something like that, because I'd asked that question about it. And I was a little surprised, because I was thinking I'm the only one here staying here. Everyone else went to Mayapur. So I told him, no, Srila Prabhupada, and going out collecting. And then I'm trying to think, Guru Kripa had memorized the Brahma Samhita. So I said, I'm trying to learn Sanskrit. And Prabhupada looked at me, he said, you will not learn Sanskrit in 100 years. He told me that. And then I mentioned something about this Sanskrit teacher. Actually, I didn't want to learn Sanskrit. I just wanted to memorize Brahma Samhita. I wasn't interested in learning Sanskrit. And then I mentioned something about this Sanskrit teacher who traveled with Prabhupada, but Prabhupada had dismissed him, some disturbance with him, and I said something about him, and he says, he is not Panditji, he is a dog. He barks like a dog. So all right, wrong name. and then Prabhupada, he was getting more angry with me. It was like he was doing this, and he said, I said, well, Srila Prabhupada, I'm just trying to work with my godbrothers. And he said, all of them or just some of them? And I didn't know how to answer that. All of them or just some of them. And then he said, all of them or just some of them? And I said, and then he said, give me their names. And then I said, well, Tamal. I was really stammering now. And then Prabhupada said, than just go to Mayapur and plow the fields. And at last I thought, oh, at last I get to go to Mayapur. That's good. So then Prabhupada went on his morning walk. This was when we were on Albert Road. He's walking down the steps of the house where we were staying. And then I'm packing my bags, and I have a big Indian metal trunk, and I'm carrying the metal trunk down the stairs, and Srila Prabhupada returned from his walk, and he's walking up the stairs. And he passed me, and he looked at me, and he said, "Where are you going?" And then someone said, "Oh, Prabhupada, he's going to Mayapur to plow the fields." And then Prabhupada just started laughing. He started laughing very hard. He laughed all the way up the stairs. He laughed walking across the veranda. He was still laughing when he went into his room. It was divine, kind of some divine anger he gave me, like, don't complain or something. So what I heard from that incident, not just from that incident, I saw Srila Prabhupada as my father or my grandfather. I had a very affectionate relationship with Prabhupada. It was very, like, I would be in his room and I'd be with him, and I wasn't his servant in the sense of his secretary or anything like that, but he treated me like a son. And I felt like this chastisement and everything, that he was dealing with me in a very affectionate and personal way. And I understood that Prabhupada was showing some anger, but I felt that I was very fortunate to be able to receive some chastisement from Srila Prabhupada. And then of course, my nature is to get angry also. Sometimes I react to some situation, I'll become a little upset or angry, but generally with Srila Prabhupada, I mean, I took it as he's sending me to Mayapur to plow the fields. I'm very fortunate. I wanted to go to Mayapur, and I was wondering when this collection is going to end and when will I get to go to Mayapur. So now I get to Mayapur, and anyway, I was just happy to be able to do what Srila Prabhupada asked me to do, although I knew nothing about how to work with oxen and plow the fields. So when I got there, I immediately went to where the workers were working with the oxen, and they were all Muslim. Most of them were Muslim workers. They wore these big, pointed, kind of Chinese hard straw hats. The sun was very intense, and they had good shoes and everything. Whereas I was there, and I was in flip-flops, because there were 2 rupees, that's what we used to use. And here I am being introduced to how to plow the field with oxen, with a yoke and everything. And the workers, they would shout at the oxen, mostly one syllables, like pod, like the plows near your foot or something like that. And they would poke the oxen with sticks. And I was I'm like, how do I deal with oxen? I don't know anything about dealing with oxen. So anyway, I start plowing, and I'm going in a kind of a straight line, and I get towards the end, and while I'm walking, big mounds of earth, like big dirt clods, are coming up, and my feet are twisting because all I'm wearing is these flip-flops, and not at all adequate for plowing fields. And people are coming by, the workers are laughing, and at the end of the row, I didn't know how to stop the oxen, so they just kind of walked off the job and sat down or something. I don't know what. The oxen got to the end, and you have to be able to turn them around or something. So I couldn't do that. Anyway, this was going on. Jayapataka said he looked out the window and he saw some sannyasi plowing the fields, and he thought he said he thought that I was from one of the Gaudiya months nearby, and that he was surprised to see a sannyasi plowing the fields. He thought it was from the Gaudiya month. He didn't exactly know what was going on. So then I was trying for, I don't know, day 2 or 3 or whatever it was. I was trying to plow the fields, very kind of unsuccessfully, not very good at it. And then Srila Prabhupada, I saw Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada, when he heard that I'd plowed the field, he was very happy. And then he said, this boy is simple and sincere. So he can remain in Mayapur and he can teach English to the Bengalis. That's what he said. So that became my new job, to teach Bengalis teach English to the Bengalis, and they would all say, "What is your name?" Like only knew a certain amount of English, like, "What is your name?" That was one thing they knew, and a couple other things. But that's how they greeted me. They knew more English than I knew Bengali. And anyway, so I did that. I had that job then, teaching English to the Bengalis. I probably didn't do that any more successfully than plowing the fields.
It was hard to walk with Srila Prabhupada because there was a lot of people that wanted to do that, you know. And so, as I remember, when sometimes we would go on walks, and when he was in New York, but I could just tag along way up far on the outside. And at first, it was hard for me to understand Srila Prabhupada. And second of all, there was everybody's jockeying for position and things like that. So I didn't really have much to do. But then, you know, what happened is very early on, much too soon, I became the temple president. Again, because I was the oldest person there, the only one that held down a job. The other guy had left, and Rupanuga, who's my GBC, made me the temple president. So then my first interactions with Prabhupada were more by correspondence, because you were supposed to write him once a month and tell him, give him a report of things, you know. And he was just write nice, encouraging letters back and so on. He really wanted. The one thing was, I had finished all my coursework for a PhD in religious studies. And devotees were telling me to quit. And Prabhupada told me, no, you get your PhD. He really wanted to do that. It took a long time before I could get myself entangled enough to do that, but we didn't know he had plans like the Bhaktivedanta Institute and things like that. And he really, you know, didn't want to have just a bunch of people who didn't have, were uneducated or part of the hippie movement. Prabhupada did not like the hippie movement. He said once, "I have turned hippies into happies." He thought they're morose, drug addicted, you know, all these things. He was not happy with the hippies. Those were the people that came to him. It was really, you had to be a double dropout to be a devotee. You had to drop out from mainstream society into the counterculture, and then from the counterculture to Krishna consciousness. That was the social distance you had to travel, you know. So, and then I can't remember exactly, you know, when I got the idea that I was supposed to be one of the people. I didn't have a PhD yet. I was still waiting to write a doctoral dissertation. I've done all the coursework, but to write the doctoral dissertation, you need a couple of years in a library, really. And I got that later on by ISKCON. When the Bhaktivedanta Institute was formed, I was just allowed to spend my time doing research. I had to write a doctoral dissertation. And Prabhupada had asked me once, what will you write your doctoral dissertation on? And I said, I'm going to write about the intellectual, social, philosophical necessity of Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada said, oh, very good, all around necessity. I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. But of course, that's too much too. I mean, I put, to write a doctoral dissertation, first you have to get a proposal. And the first proposal I had, I couldn't get a committee on because they said, this is not a doctoral dissertation, this is a life's work. And so my advisor said to me, look, find a theologian that's written, a contemporary theologian that's written a reasonable amount of works in the English language and do a critical study of his idea of God. And there was one person I was interested in, and that's what I did on a philosopher of religion named Charles Hartshorne. And especially involved something got interested in before I became a devotee, which was is called the ontological argument for the existence of God. That God just doesn't happen to exist. He exists without the possibility of not existing. And there's a whole famous medieval argument by Anselm called the ontological argument. So that's what I ended up doing. You know, had it something pretty small, and you could spend a couple of years in a library reading everything written about it, and then go on. That's what happened. Yeah. No, Prabhupada wanted me to go in. He hadn't said the Bhaktivedanta Institute. He wanted me to go in and arrange to have what he called ISKCON Bhagavat College. That's what he called it. ISKCON Bhagavat College. And I said, we will be in Mayapur, but we will be affiliated with the university. People will study with us, he said. People will study with us. But the University of Calcutta will give the degree. What is the name of this college you want? ISKCON Bhagavat College. What will be the degree? He said, PhD-B, Doctor of Bhagavat Philosophy. So that's what he actually wanted, to have this kind of affiliation with the University of Calcutta. And we also ended up starting a big library program, because when he told me that what he wanted was basically a research library that would be basically about, you had to research library. And I said to Prabhupada, oh, this was in Mayapur, we'll need a big library. And he said, oh, we can have a big library. All the books from the 4 sampradayas. And then bing! And I said to Prabhupada, we will have to, I think we will have to use photocopying or some kind of reproduction to get these books, because a lot of them are rare and out of print. And he said, get the BI people, not the BI, the BBT people to start making a list of books, and then get some more. And so this became a project. I mean, it was finished, actually. This particular library project was finished because we got a grant. Tom Hopkins helped us, actually. He turned out to be on the grant committee. And we got a big grant, and we sent devotees. And by that time, we could go into places and do photocopies or microfilm copies of rare books. And so, and that project was finished eventually. And we published Motilal Barsanidas published the book of all the books in our catalog, and there's a repositories there at a university in Washington D.C. and other places that have this, and the catalogs are there too. Benares Hindu University has a catalog, has a catalog of a microfilm thing of all, not just the catalog, but the actual copies of the books on microfiche or microfilm. Well, that was done. That was something that Prabhupada wanted. It happened years later. People had almost forgotten about it. But Charles S.J. White, he was the scholar from American University. He didn't forget. He caught a hold of me after he'd retired and said, I have time now. We have to finish this problem. We haven't made the catalog. devotees had all forgotten about it. And Charles White got this, got the whole thing completed according to what we had promised we would do to get this big grant.
Well, as far as learning and hearing from Srila Prabhupada, I remember when we were after Cross Maidan, we went to Kolkata, and they did a program in the Esplanade. Esplanade runs along Chowringhee Boulevard, and that's where they play soccer matches and things like that. And it goes all the way up towards near where the temple, where the house was, or temple in Kolkata. That's near, I think that's called the Victorian Monument and all that. So anyway, we had a big program, as we had in Mumbai, had a big program in the Esplanade. And another huge Pondo program, that's how they were going. And during that time, it was during the Naxalite period in Kolkata. And every week they were kidnapping 2 or 3 major industrialists. And it was a very violent time. It was a troubled time. And in the middle of it, we're having a program in the Esplanade. And Prabhupada was speaking, and then there would be questions and answers. And when people would come and give papers with their questions, and one of the papers handed to Srila Prabhupada said, "Fly or die." That's what the paper said. And to Prabhupada, these kind of things were humorous. Later, during that time, we did a program in one of the colleges. They call them colleges. They're like pre-university or something. All the students were very radical, and one person, he said to Srila Prabhupada, he said, "All of you are foreigners, and you seem to be very interested in that. But we are Bengalis, and none of us are very interested in that. So can you explain why?" And it was like as if to imply that we're all some kind of CIA agents or something like that. So then Srila Prabhupada, he was unfazed, and he said, "Well, if none of you have any interest in this, it must be because you're one of 4 kinds of people." And then he said, "Namam duskritino mudha prapadyante naradama mayaparita jnana suram bhavamashrita." He says, because first of all, you're duskritina, you're all impious. And then he said, "Namam duskritino mudha." Then you're like asses, and the ass they'll hang a carrot in front of him, and he'll chase after the carrot he'll move towards the carrot all day long and never get it. And he says, or like hard workers, mundane workers, asses, mudhas. And he said, "Namam duskritina mudha prapadyante naradama." Lowest of men. He said, interest in so many things, cultural, this and that, but nothing regarding your own spiritual identity of who you are. No interest. Therefore, lowest of men. Maya parita jnana. All your education is being stolen by Maya, by illusion. Or asuram bhava mashrita. Or he says, or perhaps you're just demons. That's the way he pronounced it. Or perhaps you're simply demons. But he said, but please don't take my offense. I'm not saying this. These are the words of Krishna, and he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that's how he answered now have kirtan. That's how he answered that. I mean, I thought Srila Prabhupada's name is Aboy Ravindra. He's fearless, and at the same time, he could answer any question. Nothing. We did a program in Deshapriya Park later during the Bangladesh War. And they were having blackouts every night. So the electricity would go out. You couldn't light a match or anything for fear of, the wars going on. And Srila Prabhupada, his preaching was like the Simha Guru. He was like a lion. So I knew many sides of Srila Prabhupada, but I saw Srila Prabhupada never without a response. And always, to me, I mean, he was worshipable for me in everything he did, everything he said. There was always everything, there was some philosophical content in it. And everything was a learning experience by hearing him, being with him. Sometimes I just go into his room and sit down there for hours, and he didn't chase me out or anything like that. And I remember walking with him in Mumbai once, and somehow I wanted to impress him. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, look at all these people, they're just mad after sense gratification. I said like that, and Prabhupada looked at me and he said, you brought the poison with you. And then I was thinking, what does this mean? And then I understood. He's saying India was far different before the Westerners came here, meaning the English. And people had more of a God-centered, Krishna-conscious society. But the Westerners brought the poison with them. That's what he was saying. So, at first you'd be a little shocked by some of the things. But at the same time, everything with Prabhupada was, I felt, extreme humility. Extreme humility. He would teach you, anything was of concern in your life. Srila Prabhupada dealt with you extremely personally and very, I felt that when I first met Srila Prabhupada, I want to be like him. That's how I felt. He was just, and then I realized after some time, I'll never be like him. He's an exalted, pure soul. And it was so wonderful to be in his association, unlike anyone I never met in my life. And as I said in the beginning, I could never measure Prabhupada's stature. To me, he was always larger than life. But affectionate with me like a son or a grandson. That's what I always felt from him. Just very personal, extreme affection. But I mentioned a few times Prabhupada chastising me. That was not the usual interchange with Srila Prabhupada. The usual interchange was that of very sweet and affection and advice and dealing with you like you were his own family members. And one of the reasons I went to India, I was debating whether I wanted to go to India, but at the time, I wanted to get Prabhupada's original Srimad Bhagavatams, and I only could get the third volume. So I thought maybe in India I'll get these other volumes. And then Prabhupada told me I could meet with his son. I met with Vrindavan Das. He was, because Vrindavan Das was in charge of distributing those Bhagavatams, so he gave me the first volume of the Srimad Bhagavatam. He had a 3-volume set, but I couldn't find the second volume. And then when I got to Radha Damodar Temple, where Srila Prabhupada was, used to be a small room, and there was 2 copies of the second volume of the Srimad Bhagavatam in that room. So then I said to Srila Prabhupada, started to say, Srila Prabhupada, there's 2 volumes of the Srimad Bhagavatam here. Before I could finish, he said, yes, you can have one of them. So then I had all those volumes, and I had them signed by Srila Prabhupada. But then later they were going to make a time capsule or something and make the paper acid proof or something. And so I donated those volumes, and then they decided not to do it, and then they gave those volumes away from someone else. And I was like, oh, okay, well. C'est la vie. C'est la vie, exactly.
I think the times that I had some of the most interesting interactions with Prabhupada was in airports. Not so much when he would arrive, although sometimes, but when he was leaving, because then it was more casual. There weren't a lot of ceremonies, and you could sit and talk to him. This was a New York airport, and at those days, Prabhupada was leaving, and the security wasn't like it was now, but still, a whole lot of devotees would follow him into the airport. And it was casual, and you could talk to him. It was more intimate. It wasn't a big ceremony, because a lot of times we came to the airport, we'd do an arti, a whole, Guru Puja right there, So it was very packed in the boarding area. And I could see that there were passengers who were booked for that plane. They couldn't get in. And I could see the gate agents or whatever, the airport people, trying to get devotees to leave so the passengers could get in. Everybody were absorbed in Prabhupada. Everybody just sort of ignoring them, And so I didn't know what to do. I thought this was not good for us to do like that. So I went to Rupanuga, who's still my GBC, and I said to him, look, there's a problem because we filled up the boarding area. And so Rupanuga tried to get people to leave, and everybody was blowing him off because Prabhupada is talking with the people around him and stuff like that. So finally Rupanuga jumps up on a chair, and he goes like this, makes a megaphone with his mouth, and he says, all devotees, leave the boarding area at once. All devotees, get out. And before anybody could move, they're all looking up in shock, before anybody else could move, Prabhupada was up and getting out, walking out. And Rupanuga started laughing. He says, not you, Srila Prabhupada. So these are the kind of things that would happen there in the airport. What you saw when Prabhupada did that was this kind of humility. He wasn't outraged. He wasn't mad that somebody. He just was. Oh, that's what the authorities said, and he just was going to do it.
This is a difficult question. If I was ever in Srila Prabhupada's room when he was with his godbrothers, or I remember it was when in his room when he would talk about his godbrothers, or when they visited him, but some indication is that when I asked Srila Prabhupada for sannyas, Prabhupada asked me, why do you want to take sannyas? And I said, because I cannot get along with my godbrothers. Now, nowadays, this would not be a very good way of asking. And then Srila Prabhupada responded, very good reason, which is some indication that his relationship perhaps with his godbrothers. I said, I cannot get along with my godbrothers. Prabhupada said, very good reason. And I remember one person criticized Srila Prabhupada, one of his godbrothers. And he said, they may be, I forget the word he used, or they may be tigers. They may be this, or they may be tigers, but they are not persons. And he would sometimes become angry, and he felt very much. Sometimes he felt like his godbrothers didn't appreciate what he was trying to accomplish. So, on the other hand, as far as Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he sent me once in 1974. He sent me to Srila Sridhar Maharaj's Mott for some program at Srila Sridhar Maharaj's Mott. And one of Prabhupada's godbrothers at that program another person made some remark about, oh, there was someone present there, and one of his disciples glorified that person as being the more or less the like the epicenter or something of the worldwide Hare Krishna mission. And Prabhupada was very angry when he heard that. He said he never left India. He never left India. He never. So Prabhupada was very sensitive. He wanted the appreciation of his godbrothers, but he didn't always get that. And he was sensitive about that, and we were also very sensitive about that. And so I had some different encounters with some of his godbrothers, and like, for instance, Bon Maharaj, and well, different persons. So we were a little aware that the relationship wasn't always harmonious, because Prabhupada hadn't been he hadn't been very involved in the internal affairs of the Gaudiya Math, but he had some relationship with. Later we heard about Srila Sridhar Maharaj and like that.
Bhakti Siddhanta's people were always interested in the academic side of things, you know. I mean, this is what Brahmins do. If your teachers, you're Brahminical, and you do this kind of thing. And I don't know exactly what Bhakti Siddhanta wanted in this regard, but he did have a lot of collections of books, and I assume that Prabhupada knew what he wanted to do, because the idea is that Krishna consciousness is supposed to be a major world religion eventually. And from Krishna consciousness, when I first really started understanding Krishna consciousness, every other religion that I knew about or had studied, it's like they'd taken some piece of it and run with it. But all of it was together. The whole thing was Krishna consciousness. So it seemed to me to be quite comprehensive. And of course, Prabhupada was quite right about he didn't want people to give up their religion, but you just add Krishna consciousness, and especially the four regulative principles. The four regulative principles are not simply moral principles. I think a lot of devotees think of them as moral principles. They're that, but they're also principles of knowledge. They make pratyaksha, direct experience, direct perception of Supreme possible. This process of getting rid of the modes of passion, the modes of ignorance, established in the modes of goodness, going from there into transcendence, you can actually, everything that you read about in the Bhagavatam, you can actually see. That's why he called it a science of self-realization. You have the experience. You can do it. You just can't do funny things to rats in cages for your science. You have to do it to yourself. But you can. So this is actually, it's a process of knowledge. Because he was asked, why have you come to the West? And he said, I've come to give you a brain. He said the social body, like the human body, has a head, arms, bellies, and legs, and your society is headless. And then he said, actually, this was also in an airport, by the way, he said, actually, he said, everybody is in your society, he was talking to reporters, in your society, everyone is a Shudra and there are a few Vaishyas. That was his diagnosis of America. It was so funny too, because these reporters were talking to him, and they had their pencils out and everything. And why have you come to the West? And he says, I have come to give you a brain. And the pencils stop and the eyes look up. That was another airport incident, I've come to give you a brain. I take that very seriously. This has to be the brain. And you can see all the different elements. The thing with Gita Nagari, for example. How to be self-sufficient. How you can live get all the nourishment you need without animal slaughter. All these things. How you can have the right ecology. Everything is there. And Prabhupada managed to do it, with the Bhaktivedanta Institute on one side, Gita Nagari and other places like that on the other. This is the way of the future. If you really want to take care of the earth properly, this is what you do. Prabhupada said that in the West, the standard is the standard of the mode of passion. What's the result of the mode of passion? Misery. Guess what? So this is actually, and there's no one. The whole thing, the whole development of the West is the mode of passion, and then the mode of passion brings misery. How do you treat the misery? Mode of ignorance. You take opioids and things like that, Or you kill yourself out of despair. What have I done with my life? And they're useless, They're miserable. So when he said, "I've come to give you a brain," he really means the Brahminical people, and to actually get people to cultivate the mode of goodness, and that's what he's given us. And as that develops, you discover you're not alone in your body. There's two of you. There's you, and there's the super soul, and they're not exactly next to each other. There's more intimate because the super soul is the self of the self. And knowing God, at least in this action, in this aspect of Paramatma, is something like knowing yourself. Once you see it, you can't, do I exist or not? Well, yeah, of course. I couldn't answer the question otherwise, So similarly, this goes back to this ontological argument I did a doctoral dissertation on, but this is what's there, and you can do it, but it requires this particular discipline, that we follow these four regular principles, and also to really get stable there and to advance even further, not just the mode of goodness, but Vishuddha Sattva, purified goodness, pure goodness, where the super soul becomes available. And when that happens, it's not subtle. It's very heavy, that you're sharing this body with Krishna, and he's telling you, moving you around. And so you get this. Pratyaksha avagamam, it gives you pratyaksha. Pratyaksha in the Bhagavad Gita literally means right in front of your eyes. And Krishna says that in the Bhagavad Gita, this is what you get. You get pratyaksha and direct perception. And so that's why Prabhupada uses this term science of self-realization. You want to get the result of the science, you have to practice it. If you do chem lab stuff, if your test tubes are dirty, it won't work. You have to follow the directions. Prabhupada said, they have to follow the directions on the bottle. You take the medicine.
So then it was decided I was going to travel. I knew that in the temples that they were distributing Srila Prabhupada's books, but they weren't always paying for them. So I knew that the temples owed money to the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. So I said to Srila Prabhupada, what I'd like to do is I'll travel with some men through South India. We will make life members, and we'll preach, and we'll collect. And I knew by making my life members, I'd be able to collect money. And I said, and whatever we collect, after our initial expenses, which were very frugal expenses, I said, we will send all the money direct to your Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, with the idea of paying back what the temples owed. So Srila Prabhupada, he liked that idea. And I said, for that I'll need, they had some Jeeps, and I knew they were in Bombay, so I said, for that I'll need some vehicle. And Srila Prabhupada said, yes, you contact Bombay, and you tell them to give you a Jeep, which I did, and they gave me a Jeep. They weren't exactly thrilled with the idea. And then I was given some books, and I traveled with another sannyasi, a Koyananda Swami, and one other man who was a very good person. His name was Anir Deshavapudas. He's a main pujari. He and his brother were the main pujaris at Mayapur. He's still very active, I think, this Anir Deshavapu. He was a young brahmachari. He traveled with us, and 3 Bengalis. And we would travel. I think there were the 6 of us, and we travel and do programs and preaching programs. We do, like had learned from Prabhupada, we did also Pando programs. And throughout Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka state, and then like that, and collecting and kept very careful accounts, and then turned over the money to Prabhupada's book fund. In fact, the main accountant who was overseeing all the accounts in India, and all I had kept was a simple cash book. Money coming in, money going out, with vouchers and receipts and everything. And he told me I was the only person who kept proper accounts. And it was just a simple little cash book.
When Prabhupada came to Philadelphia, one of the first professors to come and talk to him was Tom Hopkins, who was maybe the first academic person to recognize what Krishna consciousness was. He was a scholar of Hinduism, and he happened to run across the devotees in New York City and got to see what it was. And they didn't know much about Krishna consciousness, but they got more and more and more into it as he got to know him. So he became a great appreciator of Srila Prabhupada. He just passed away not long ago. Of Srila Prabhupada, one of the first academic ones to recognize Srila Prabhupada. He was amazed by Prabhupada. And you know, I mean, if you're at all a decent person in your Prabhupada's presence, you realize you're in something very special is happening here. And actually, there was talk about his going to Franklin and Marshall for a while, when he was going to start the movement. Before there's some correspondence where that was maybe a possibility that he would get an academic position. You can see Prabhupada talking about it in some correspondences with devotees, that he might stay here. He didn't know whether he was going to go back to India, stay in America. Maybe he had a job, you know, to teach in some school. And Franklin and Marshall was the one. That must have been Tom Hopkins, who was planning to do that or thinking of doing it. The academics really came to our rescue because of the anti-cult deprogrammers and all that other kinds of thing. You know, that was the cult phenomena. And we were very controversial because there was one pamphlet we put out, "Don't lump us in," you know, like that. And so, as far as I remember, when he was there, that's what they talked about, at least when I was in the room. One time we were walking in New Vrindavan. Many devotees were coming there, and Prabhupada, as we were walking, was talking. There was a woods, you know. There was a pathway through the woods, and he started talking about how the tree takes leaves, take in sunlight, and then it grows the wood. So he said, wood is just sunlight in another form. It's really sunlight. It looks like wood, but it's really sunlight. And if you ignite it again, the sunlight comes back out. So he said, similarly, actually everything is spirit. What we call matter is really, another form of spirit. So ultimately, everything is spirit, because this all comes from Krishna's energy and is next to Krishna, and so it's all spirit. And that point, I got really confused, and we stopped, and I said, Prabhupada, I'm confused now. I said, I'm a fairly new devotee, and I'm spending a lot of time trying to understand I'm not my body, and what is the difference between matter and spirit. So I'm trying to understand this distinction. But you're saying now everything is spirit. So now I'm confused. And this is what Prabhupada's answer, and it took me a long time to understand it. He said, we are not Mayavadis. There are different kinds of spirit. And so actually, if you look at Krishna consciousness, if you take what's material, you use it in Krishna's service. Somewhere else, Prabhupada calls it the re-spiritualization of matter. So the idea and so it's just a different kind of spirit, ultimately. You use it that way. If the veil of illusion is gone, and you can, and the material body can be as good as a spiritual body. You can do everything in this body that you could do in the spiritual world. So that was like a big moment for me. So we are not Mayavadis. There are different kinds of spirit. And just thinking on those two sentences, I finally began to understand. And this is savishesha. There are visheshas. There are distinctions within the spirit. And the Mayavadi is near vishesha. A vishesha is like a concrete particular thing of this and not that. So there's variety. Prabhupada always used the word variety. It's not all one. There's variety. Because of course the impersonalists, their ideas, there's nothing. It's cognitively identical with nothing. But and you get realized knowledge when you use everything in Krishna's service. By doing that, you can start to see, and that the what Prabhupada called the spiritualized material body is as good as spirit, and for all practical purposes, you can do everything in this life that you could do in Vaikuntha. If you're there.
Well, the only thing involving cooking, when I was leaving, I'd been in India for 4 years, and I'd just come there on a what is it, a tourist visa, and then every year we'd just renew the tourist visa for another year. You didn't have to have any special visa. And then after 4 years, they changed the laws, and you could no longer do that. So I had to leave India, and I was planning on going to Thailand, getting another visa and coming right back. And then Srila Prabhupada, I telling that to Srila Prabhupada, and he said, well, do one thing. When you go to Thailand, please open up a temple there. So I'm like, but Srila Prabhupada, I'm just going there to get a visa. And then Srila Prabhupada said, there's a Bengali saying that the reaping machine, the cultivator of the rice reaping machine, it will reap in heaven or hell. So we must be like that machine. Wherever we are, our service must go on. So then I went to Thailand, And I'm working there and trying to preach in Thailand. A little more difficult because because not everyone in Thailand speaks English. But I'm working there, and then but I couldn't get my visa. I applied for an entry visa, but I didn't know they only gave entry visas basically to Indian families. So I'm waiting there, and then the Mayapur festival was coming up. So then I was thinking I need to get a visa, and I can't get it here. So I flew to Hong Kong, and went to where the temple was in Kowloon, and I got to that address, and I walk up the stairs to the address, knock on the door, get into the door opens, and there sitting on a seat is Srila Prabhupada. Completely unexpected, didn't know he was in Hong Kong, didn't know he had just gotten to Hong Kong a few hours before I got to Hong Kong. And I'm immediately offering my Dandavat pranams to him on the floor, and before I can get up, he says, "Oh, you have come to Hong Kong, now you can take over the temple here." So then, now I'm taking over the temple there. I get and Prabhupada is there in Hong Kong for some days, and then they were cooking for Srila Prabhupada, the devotees making kachoris in the kitchen, but they weren't coming out properly. So Srila Prabhupada went into the kitchen and he cooked the kachoris himself. And then he and his servants were going to the airport, and they told us, they said, "So wait till these are offered, and then you can take them." And then they left, and then I more or less was thinking, forget that. These are cooked by Srila Prabhupada himself. I immediately started eating them. I was thinking, Srila Prabhupada, he doesn't have to offer anything. Everything coming from his hand is prasadam. So I immediately started eating some of those kachoris. They're cooked by Srila Prabhupada himself. That was, I never learned from Prabhupada how to cook, although when I was in Vrindavan, I did visit in Vrindavan. Jamuna and Palika were there, so sometimes, and I was living near Brahmakund with Gargamuni and Subal Swami, and who else was there? I think Pushta Krishna was living there. But their way of cooking wasn't very appealing. They would buy a cauliflower, they would cook everything, the stalks, but if I walked across town to where Jamuna and Palika was, then I would eat what they had cooked. I was only in Vrindavan 5 or 6 days, and when at that time I was a brahmachari. I would get the complaint, "What kind of brahmachari are you?" I was thinking, well, they know how to cook, you guys don't.
Sometimes, you'd see Srila Prabhupada while somebody's reading from scripture or something like that. He sits very, very still. And I was sitting next to him. I could see his right hand. And I got more and more absorbed in the fact that he didn't move. Usually when we're sitting around, there's a little twitching going on, this, that, and the other thing, this other kind. And I'm looking at the devotees, I'm sort of next to Prabhupada on the dais a little bit, looking out, and people are like, doing this kind of stuff, and stretching, and, and they're moving their legs around. Prabhupada was absolutely motionless. And I watched his hand. I was sitting next to him, I could see his hand and, part of his leg, and he just didn't move at all. And I finally told one of Prabhupada's servants about this, and they said, yes, somebody gave him a self-winding watch, and it would always stop. So here's a person who got so much done, but actually when he sat still, he was very, very still. There was just none of that nervous energy that we all have, twitching and stuff like that. He was, that was
He was a yogi.
Yeah, exactly. He could be like just in samadhi just by sitting there and not moving, just listening to somebody who's reading Krishna book or something, like that. I think what it tells you is that Prabhupada was always in the presence of Krishna and always in samadhi, even though he was active. It wasn't that you have to withdraw from the world to be in samadhi, but bhakti means to engage the senses. And so if you're engaged, your senses are fully engaged, you may sometimes be moving or seeing or hearing or something, but you're still very, very peaceful and very, very, a place of transcendence. Part of our thing was the In God We Trust Party for Purified Leaders. And for that, we were really talking about being part of the government, And I said to Prabhupada that you really envision a time when devotees will run countries and command armies. And he said yes. And because he had been talking about this, eventually a war between the devotees and the demons. He had said, and I'm going back a little bit, the same conversation, he said, therefore there should be a war. He said, these wars where the demons fight the demons doesn't accomplish anything, because whoever wins is a demon. But he said, if you have a war and one side is devotees and the other side is demon, then that's Krishna consciousness. And so he was really talking about, when we had the In God We Trust Party, he was thinking about what government does. And government is the rule of law. And so I had already been scared by some devotees. So I had a doubt. And so I was able to ask him, you envision time when devotees will run countries and command armies? And he said, yes. So I said, then how in that circumstances can we be sure that we won't become demons? He said, chant 16 rounds a day and follow the 4 regulative principles. And I said, and that's enough? And he said, yes, that's enough.
What I was talking to you before we started recording, I was mentioning how when I had jaundice or hepatitis, contagious, it's jaundice that you get from water, basically, or from contaminated food. But in India, it's not uncommon. And I had jaundice, and I went to Srila Prabhupada, and I said, Srila Prabhupada, I told him I had jaundice. I said, so what should I eat? And Srila Prabhupada said, only take Krishna Prasadam. And I was just, oh, okay, Srila Prabhupada, fine, but what shouldn't I eat? And he said, don't take anything that's not Krishna Prasadam. I just thought, that was like classic Prabhupada, kind of the way he could just answer in the most simple way. But what was there in that answer is Prabhupada's amazing wit, his extremely, dry sense of humor, but very, very deep humor. Like, I remember when we were walking in Vrindavan, And someone said to Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada, these devotees from Los Angeles, they're only taking Ekadasi preparations. And Srila Prabhupada said, oh, advancement, like that. And then everyone crowded close to him. Advancement, Srila Prabhupada? And he said, yes. And then somebody was trying to play the pundit, says, but Srila Prabhupada, it says in the Bhagavad Gita that grains, let's see how it is. Rains come from sacrifice, and grains are produced from rains, and all living entities subsist on food grains. And Srila Prabhupada said, his answer is, he said, very straight-faced, that is for those who are passing 7. So he said, that is for animals. And then, so everyone, that's amazing. You know, so then when Prabhupada got to Los Angeles, I wasn't there, but I heard the whole thing, and that Prabhupada had said about only animals, basically the summary is only animals need to take food grains. But I thought, Prabhupada's putting them on, and they don't know it. He's just completely playing with them, and they have no idea. And then he went to Los Angeles, and then they said, Srila Prabhupada, these persons, they only take Ekadasi preparations. It was the same references that happened in Vrindavan on the walk. And then Srila Prabhupada said, oh, why is that? And they said, and then they were shocked, and they said, but Srila Prabhupada, they say that only animals need to take food grains. And he said, I take food grains. Do I look like an animal? So, but I was so positive when I heard this incident. And I knew something of Srila Prabhupada. I think Prabhupada's playing with them. He's putting them on, and just in a very straight, way of speaking. They have no idea that he's joking with them. And I saw that. I saw Prabhupada's humor on many occasions, and it's not like a rowdy kind of humor. It's a very philosophical and almost like he could say this, and just very, very wonderful sense of humor. Extremely, charming, witty, everything, but you would not see it in a boisterous way.
My daughter must have been like 5 years old or something like that, and by then she was in a Gurukula, and we had brought bangles back. We had brought bangles back for her, and she was wearing these bangles, And then he saw my daughter, and he said, "Oh," he says, "so the girls in your country, they like these too." And she said yes, and she was showing all the bangles. And he said, "Wow," he said, "you should marry her to a Kshatriya." Then one of the teachers said to my daughter, "You chant a Bhagavad Gita verse?" And she could chant a lot of them, So I forgot what the verse was or the verses, but she chanted a couple of verses in Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada looked up, his eyes got big, said, "Better make it a Brahmana." It's such a good sense of humor, It was so funny. Just everybody was cracking up, So we had this fire sacrifice in the Philadelphia temple, and my son Yudhishthir maybe 3 years old or something like that, you know. And he had gotten the coconut from the fire sacrifice. We had gotten dobs shipped from Florida someplace for the fire sacrifice we had for initiations and things. And so he had this dob, and he was carrying it around with him everywhere, you know. And Prabhupada was sort of watching this little kid. You know, he's wearing a dhoti and stuff like that, you know. This little kid with this dob. And then when we go to the airport, where you have the conveyor belt where you put all the stuff on it, you know, people are putting their bead bags on it. And Srila Prabhupada looks at Yudhishthira and says, put the dob on the belt. And he did. He put the dob on the conveyor belt to be x-rayed. Yeah. Prabhupada really had quite a sense of humor, you know. He was really amused by these children.
Well, there are so many admirable qualities of Srila Prabhupada, but what I especially was attracted to of his great affection for everybody. And we've always heard the saying that Srila Prabhupada built a house for everyone. And it was, I felt with Srila Prabhupada, it was like, if you could imagine a diamond. A diamond is many faceted. So you could approach Srila Prabhupada like a diamond, so many different facets to Srila Prabhupada. You could approach Srila Prabhupada in any of innumerable ways. If you were conservative, if you were radical, if you were, you know, if you were young, or if you were old, if you were inclined to Indian culture, if you were a revolutionary, any way you wanted, you could approach Srila Prabhupada and he could respond in his affection to any different situation of anyone's life. He had that incredible nature where he is affectionate with everybody. He didn't close anyone out of his world. He is open to everyone. And I very much admired that quality of Srila Prabhupada. And then also, as I mentioned in the stories, Srila Prabhupada is fearless. He's never daunted. There's no question that unnerves him or makes him, you know, feel threatened. He could respond in any way, he can be stern, he could chastise you, or he could embrace you. He could, as Srila Govinda Maharaj mentioned, or Srila Sridhar Maharaj, I mean, Srila Prabhupada could wait in line to use the bathroom while his disciples were in there. He had just this extreme humility. And everyone, I mean, if I could just see Srila Prabhupada smile, I was happy. I was happy just seeing him. And always we would want to make Prabhupada happy. We'd want to see him smiling. And he would always call us to him, like someone would call their family to him. And I mean, I grew up in a family relationship, and it was a nice family. But at the same time, with Srila Prabhupada, I left home when I was 17 because I wanted to be independent. I wanted to have my own life. I didn't want to be in my parents' house. I love both of them, but I didn't want to be with them. I wanted, you know, develop my own life. And I joined the mission when I think I was 25 years old. So I'd already had some time to myself. I'd gone to school and everything. I'd gone to university. But when I was with Srila Prabhupada, then it was different relationship. It was more than I would say more than life. It was something that went intrinsically to your soul. And I felt so much affection from him. And that's all I wanted to do, is to serve him any way he wanted and to be able to satisfy him. And if I couldn't satisfy him, I would want to know why and correct myself. But I never felt, although maybe sometimes something would happen, I could get angry because I'm a little hot-tempered, but still I would want to be able to understand what I was doing or what I had done wrong and to be able to correct that. And as a result of that, I feel as a result of that kind of mood, it would draw affection out of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was really affectionate with everybody. And somebody once told me, oh, you were with Srila Prabhupada. He was very strict, huh? And I laughed. Prabhupada, strict? He was the most humble, forgiving person. He was not strict. I mean, he could teach you, he could chastise you, but he was not strict. Not in that sense, not that he was stern. Prabhupada was anything but stern. So people, somebody said that, oh, he's very strict. Prabhupada, very strict. That was not my experience. He's not a taskmaster.
In some ways it was very mysterious. But I think the thing that really was there, like, for example, Swami Nikhilananda smoked cigarettes. I've even found out people in the Indian community that he wanted beedis shipped from India. They weren't shocked that a sannyasi smoked cigarettes, but that he smoked beedis. But so Prabhupada was just his integrity, He's he really, what he did was Krishna consciousness. He got immense happiness and joy out of it, and he exemplified everything that he taught. It was just as, he was just like the Bhagavatam in person. I know, and that's where we had the Bhagavata and the Bhagavatam together. And he did that while, always being the servant. He said this one time, one thing is to my credit, I have never tried to become the master. I have always remained the servant. So he attributed everything to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Because, he saw it. Look, he just showed up. He just showed up. He exhibited his determination. He was there. He gets on a ship to America. Somehow or other he makes it. He was actually looking to see when ships were going back to India, maybe, But somehow or other he could stay, and then one thing led to another. And then he realized that he is being carried along by the power of the internal energy through Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, everybody. And he'd really done something. The Gaudiya Math had failed. It had stopped. People were like wrangling over who will get what seat and all that stuff. But it had stopped. And Prabhupada actually managed to take it to the next step. And all while, and he said this once, one thing is to my credit, I have always remained the servant. I've never tried to become the master. And that's, Namaste Saraswata Deva. He's the servant of Bhaktisiddhanta. That's how he wants to be known.